Seagal and the Social Experiment, and a tune called Sunday Candy. Pairing food and wine. That is something you may be intimidated by, feeling like you got to get it right. I think a lot of us feel that way. Traditionally, even sommeliers have been taught that wine only pairs with some cuisines, Italian perhaps, or French. Well, my next guest is looking to challenge that notion. Beverly Crandon is a Toronto sommelier and the organizer behind a new project called Fall into Spice. So, Beverly, good afternoon to you. Tell me more about this. Why most of us, sommeliers included, are taught that wine really only pairs with certain cuisines, like the ones I mentioned.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm super stoked about this topic, and any opportunity to share my thoughts and my feelings with people, I'm all over that. So thank you. I think the issue is that wine, when you look at it as an industry and you look at where it came from, it's heavily European dominant. And then with that comes a lot of teaching and education around how wine is consumed and enjoyed in that continent, which then is going to bring you foods reminiscent to that continent. And so in my wine studies, it became very obvious to me that there was a void of discussion around with certain cuisines in wine. And I thought that was pretty interesting, especially when you dig deeper into the basics of food and wine pairing. I mean, every food and every wine comes with molecules and compounds, regardless of the cuisine. And once you understand those molecules and compounds and what they do to each other when put together, you realize, no, actually all cuisines can go with wine. You just need to understand how to do that.
And is part of what you're doing here not just sort of broadening and I guess debunking the idea that that wines do have limited pairings? So you're broadening our the partnerships between the food and the beverage, but you're also trying to make wine itself more approachable for people from non-European countries, from Caribbean, Latin, African, East Indian communities.
Exactly. So there are two sides to this situation. So one is the education and how somms or wine professionals are educated around wine and food pairing. But then the other is around the consumer and the consumer's acceptance or expectation of what is allowable for them to pair with their food. Now, a lot of our foods in the Caribbean and Africa, and actually I could say a lot of countries, they come from a peasant beginning, meaning people didn't have a lot of money. Everything was thrown into one pot, and then that's how we ate. But those foods today, if you go to a celebration, you'll notice that those are delicacies at these events today. So I'm like, well, how do we pair these delicacies with wine and get rid of the notion that it's a peasant food? Very similarly, if you go to a restaurant that is Caribbean or African or Latin American, or roots Latin American, you'll notice that they don't have a wine list. Or if they have a wine list, there's a red and a white, nondescript, but just a red and a white. Mm-hmm. So even people from the diaspora are living into and giving into the notion that our foods don't pair well with wine, and that's not true. So with Fall into Spice, my thing is to, in a fun way, because everybody loves to eat and drink wine, I hope, in a fun way, we're going to show how our foods definitely do pair with wine and how exploration of flavors is what we need to do. And I think, doing it through food and wine pairing makes it highly accessible, highly approachable. The event is it's meant for you to have fun, but it's also meant for you to walk away with a couple more points in your back pocket when you're thinking about what to pair with that special dinner you're having tonight.
Okay, I want to ask you about some of those pairings because I'd love to get into some of those specifics, but I need to ask you first about, the wine world is sort of steeped in tradition, and here you are disrupting. How uphill a battle is this, and how much of a disruptor do you feel like?
Yeah, it's true. There is a bit of disruption happening here, but I'm a strong believer, especially given my background from business and marketing, that for any industry to be viable long-term or sustainable, you have to change the way you speak about things. The things you talk about in regards to your product, your consumable product, has to relate to the people in your audience. Right now, when you look at the City of Toronto statistics, 52% of Torontonians identify as visible minorities. So if you're speaking about your product in one historical fashion, not being egalitarian when you're communicating about your product, then that's a problem. And I love wine, and so I'm a champion and a steward of wine. And I kind of feel it's my responsibility to kind of take up the torch and speak to that part of the demographic and hopefully have people follow through and follow me, like from wineries or wine marketers as well. Hopefully they jump on board as well.
Okay, so give me some examples. I mean, let's say Caribbean food, for example. What kinds of wines would pair well with those dishes?
Absolutely. So we have a bevy of dishes, and depending on what island you come from, you cook it a little differently. But I can give you some examples of some of the pairings we're going to be doing at one of the events, which I'm so looking forward to. Absolutely delicious. So codfish, so salted codfish, which we just call saltfish, and bake. And so what it is you stew up this codfish. It's a dry, kind of fried codfish, and you put it in like a fried fritter is the best way I can explain it. You stuff it in there. That is a delicacy on the islands, especially when you're on the beach. So we're going to take that, and we're going to pair that with sparkling wine. Now, people normally look at sparkling wine as a celebratory drink, and we're only going to open it if we're celebrating something. I say you need to have a bottle of sparkling wine in your fridge all the time because the bubbles, the acidity, and that fruit experience on the palate goes so well with so many things. And with salted cod being very salty, it's nice to have like an acidic burst in there and also a sweet burst in there to kind of temper that. Also, if someone's cooking your salted cod and they put a little bit too much pepper, that fruit forwardness in that sparkling wine is going to help to temper that. So here we're taking a very classic Caribbean dish and a very classic celebratory wine, and saying, oh, these things can go together.
I love it. Can I throw another one at you? So Mexican food. I think a lot of people think of, I don't know, maybe a margarita you might have along with some Mexican food. But what would you suggest in terms of wine?
So with Mexican food, we're going to do some really interesting thing. And one of the courses, we're going to take a very big red, because those big red wines oftentimes come off with a bit of alcohol on it, and alcohol converts into sugar on the palate. And what a big red with red fruit and kind of a sugar perception will do, it will take any spices that you throw into your food, and it's going to temper that. It's going to make it feel so light. Also, using a big red is going to help because a lot of Mexican dishes are meat-based. And that big red and those tannins are going to help to work to lessen the meat and the texture of that meat and the heaviness of the meat. So we're going to be doing things like that.
Beverly, you've got so many events planned that will direct people to the website to find out more, but I get a sense from what you've described here how fascinating and delicious this is all going to be. Thank you for telling me about it.
Thank you very much for having me. And if people are interested in coming out, they can go to fallintospice.com, and all the details are there. We have already sold out of 2 of the events, so we do have 2 more available. So and all the details are there. We have already sold out of 2 of the events, so we do have 2 more available, so people can still experience this.
Awesome. Thank you. That's Beverly Crandon, a Toronto sommelier. As she mentioned, fallintospice.com will tell you about the events happening in the weeks ahead around the GTA. All right, Khalil, how are things looking?
Well,